Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. This episode of Amateur Traveler is sponsored by TravelSmith. There's no time like the present to take a trip, and nobody makes it easier for you to pack up your things and head out than TravelSmith. With apparel, luggage, gear, and tips for every traveler, TravelSmith helps you get there, look great, and feel good. Check out travelsmith.com today.
I got my bags packed on a roll. I'm heading out there, and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo.
Amateur Traveler, episode 482. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about hiking one of the great pilgrimage routes as we go to Spain and hike the Camino de Santiago.
Sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. We'll be talking more about our sponsor, who is TravelSmith, later on in the show. But first, let's go to Spain and talk about the Camino de Santiago. I'd like to welcome back to the show Linda Martin from the Indie Travel Podcast, freshly minted with a new degree in teaching Spanish, and come to talk to us about the Camino de Santiago in Spain. Linda, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris.
First of all, how much of that did I screw up?
No, you got it all right, except for it's Camino de Santiago, not Del.
As I said Del, I thought that's not the right, but you are trained to teach me Spanish, so now there we go.
It's appropriate that I correct it right in the first
I wanted
sentence.
you to use that degree since you went to so much trouble to get it. So we have not talked about hiking the Camino on Amateur Traveler, in part because when I think of hiking the Camino, I think of something that's going to take a month, and we tend to target a North American audience who just doesn't have that much time off. And so we tend to target a week to 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. But you only had a week off after you finished your degree, and you did what?
Well, actually, I had 2 weeks off.
2 weeks off, sorry.
The thing about the Camino is that it's as long as you want it to be. So you start wherever you want, and of course you finish in Santiago. That's the idea. You're walking to Santiago de Compostela. And it's not just one way. A lot of people think, just like you, that it's a month. You start in the Pyrenees, and you walk 30 days until you get to Santiago. But the thing about the Camino is that it started as a medieval pilgrimage path, and the pilgrims were leaving their houses and walking to Santiago. and they just walked from their front doors. So everyone had a slightly different Camino. The routes kind of came up as people got together and walked together for safety. But yeah, the Camino's as long as you want it to be, or as short.
Well, and when we say that it's as long as you want it to be, it's not just that you're cheating, but that there are also, if we looked at a map of just Spain, ignoring the fact that it extended into France and Italy and all sorts of places, depending on where their front door was, you have hiked multiple different routes in Spain. You've hiked south to north, you've hiked east to west.
So we've actually walked 4 Caminos. The first one was in 2008, and that was the Camino Frances, which is what most people think of when they think of the Camino de Santiago. So that's one, it's called the Camino Frances, which means the French way. And the kind of accepted starting point is in Roncesvalles or maybe Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port in the French Pyrenees. And it goes, all the way from there. If you imagine that Spain is more or less a square, it's about 100 kilometers inland and parallel with the northern coast, and it goes all the way to Santiago de Compostela. We didn't start all the way at the beginning, though. We started in Pamplona, which is about 50 kilometers in.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that you had done that when you had hiked the first time.
We thought we didn't have enough time because we had only, I think, say 35 days, and we worked out how many kilometers we expected to do in a day, and it just wasn't going to work out. But it was interesting because as we kept walking, we started going slightly longer and longer distances. So we actually arrived in Santiago earlier than expected, and then we continued on and walked all the way to Finisterre, which is from Santiago to, Finisterre, which is the end of the world.
So which is cool. The Atlantic coast.
That's right, yeah. And from there, that's about 3 days from Santiago to Finisterre, and then you could do one more day to go to Murcia, which is another accepted end point of the Camino.
Okay.
So that first Camino, we actually got 3 certificates of completion because you get one when you arrive in Santiago, we got one in Finisterre, and one in Murcia. So that was quite cool. Our second Camino was in 2012. We were going to be celebrating 10 years of marriage, and we were trying to decide what to do to celebrate. And because we travel so much, we didn't just want to go on a 1-week trip. So we thought, what we'll do? We'll walk another Camino. So we decided to do the Via de la Plata, which starts in Seville in the south of Spain.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize you'd gone that far.
Yeah, 6 weeks. 6 weeks. So that was really quite far. It was about 1,040 kilometers in total. And the idea was to arrive in Santiago on the wedding anniversary.
Well, you're also hiking through some of the warm parts of Spain rather than the wet parts of Spain.
Well, that's what we thought.
Okay.
And we started in March, and the weather was quite warm in Seville. Actually, it was like late 30s, high 30s. And we thought, well, as we head north, it'll be nice and warm. But it wasn't. It actually snowed. There was a lot of rain. Some days we got hailed on. The weather was quite interesting. So that was the Via de la Plata, which was awesome. It was an old Roman road, so it was very long and flat. So it wasn't actually our favorite one because it was a little bit boring in terms of terrain.
Mm-hmm.
The third Camino we did was the Camino Inglés. Now this one goes from... It has kind of 2 starting points. So you can either start in A Coruña or in Ferrol, which are both cities in the north of Spain. And the story goes that the English pilgrims caught a boat to one of these ports and then walked on to Santiago.
Okay.
We went from Coruña, and the reason we went from Coruña is because we lived there for 4 months. And I really wanted to emulate those medieval pilgrims who walked out of their front doors. And since we were living there, we thought, we're never going to be as close as this. And, being from New Zealand, it's a bit hard to walk to Santiago, that ocean. So, we decided to do that. We walked out of our front door, and it only took us 3 days. It's only a 72-kilometer walk, so it's quite an easy one. If you go from Ferrol, I think it's about 120 in 5 days. One of the things about the Camino is that if you want to get a certificate of completion, you have to walk at least 100 kilometers. So for the Camino Inglés, we didn't get one of those.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So that was a little bit sad, but we did have our pilgrim passport, so we got stamps along the way, and so we still had a souvenir.
Okay.
And then our most recent Camino was just last month. We did the Camino Primitivo, and it's my favorite so far. So this one is the original way. The first person to walk a Camino was King Alfonso of Spain, and I think it was in the 9th century, he walked from Oviedo in the north of Spain to Santiago. And this one, it's only 13 days or 14 days, depending on how fast you walk. But the terrain was really interesting. We met lots of interesting people. And it was just a really great walk.
Now, some people would decide at this point in the program that you must be a very religious Catholic.
No, I'm not a Catholic at all.
So why are you walking the Camino? What does the Camino do for you? You've done it 4 times in 4 different ways.
Well, I'd never heard of the Camino before we did the first one, but my husband Craig said, look, we've got to do this. It's something I really want to do.
Yeah, you were doing this before the movie The Way came out, for instance, and other people heard about it.
I think The Way came out before we went, but it wasn't maybe as popular then.
Okay.
But I'll tell you something about The Way. The Way, we watched it after our second Camino, after the Via de la Plata. We were in Santiago and we decided to watch The Way. And I quite liked it. I thought it was a really good movie. But it doesn't say anything about blisters, and that's something you'll definitely know all about.
I thought I remembered him having foot problems in that. And for those people who don't know, this is a movie by Emilio Estevez with Martin Sheen, mostly as the star, who both plays the father of Emilio Estevez, a character in the movie, and is his real-life father. So,
yeah, it's worth watching, and it's good for kind of inspiration. But yeah, it really annoyed me how the female character is always wearing jeans. You would never wear jeans on the Camino. That's another thing.
You would never wear jeans because?
Well, because you're walking. I mean,
okay.
and jeans are so heavy. You need to have breathable fabric. So lightweight walking trousers or shorts, something like that, would definitely be a much better option.
Okay. So this time you picked this shorter route because you had 2 weeks, and so you picked the original route, and you said that the terrain was more interesting, or was
That's
interesting, more interesting than the one that came up from Sevilla.
That's right, yeah. We were looking at options, which Camino to do, and the reason we only had 2 weeks is because I finished my degree and then we had to go to a wedding. Also, we had a friend of ours coming to stay, and she had never done a Camino. So we were left with 4 options of Caminos to do. Well, 4 or 5. One was to do just 2 weeks of the Camino Frances, which is perfectly fine. We could have started in Leon, and that would have been acceptable. But of course, we'd already done the Camino Frances. We also could have done the last 200 kilometers or so of the Via de la Plata, which is a really wonderful section of it. It's called the Camino San Andrés. So you could start in Salamanca or Zamora and do about 2 weeks. But we'd already done that too. We could also choose to do the part of the Camino del Norte, but the Camino del Norte starts way over with the border with France as well, and we didn't want to do just 2 weeks of it. We'd quite like to do the whole thing at some point. And then the Camino Primitivo was another option, and it was the perfect length. But the problem was that in all the forums, it's kind of talked about as the most difficult Camino. So the terrain is difficult, lots of ups and downs and things like that. We didn't find it too difficult, and we're not particularly fit. I mean, we're not unhealthy, but we didn't find it too hard. There were a couple of steep climbs and a couple of steep descents, but in general, it was just a nice amount of up and down. You don't want to be on the flat all the time because it gets really boring.
Let's take a break here and hear from our sponsor, who is TravelSmith. Planning a vacation, family reunion, business trip, or weekend getaway? There's no time like the present to take a trip, and nobody makes it easier for you to pack up your things and head out than TravelSmith. With apparel, luggage, gear, and tips for every traveler, TravelSmith helps you get there, look great, and feel good. Their vast collection is full of lightweight, easy-to-pack items that are loaded with features to make your travel easier, safer, and more comfortable. TravelSmith also has the industry's largest selection of RFID blocking luggage, gear, and apparel to keep tech-savvy thieves from ruining your travels. For vacations, quick getaways, business trips, and more, shop TravelSmith.com today. Take the stress out of your travels and go there with TravelSmith. www.travelsmith.com. And I feel like we got distracted a little bit before, and then I didn't quite hear your answer of why you do the Camino, because we got distracted by the movie. Sorry.
That's right. We got
Let's go
distracted.
back a bit.
Well, Craig said we should do it, and we started walking, and I just fell in love with it because it's so freeing. Every day you just get up and you start walking, and the only thing you have to think about is where are you going to sleep and what are you going to eat, and maybe where am I going to wash my clothes. So it's just quite freeing, and I don't think you have to be religious in any way to do it, but I think everyone who does it has some sort of spiritual experience, or at least just gets to know themselves a bit better. Also, you meet amazing people while you're walking, so it is quite a meaningful experience. So that's the reason I do it. I also like hiking, so that's another reason.
Yeah, you liked hiking. In fact, the first time you were on the show, we were talking about some of the great hikes of New Zealand. So if people want to hear about that, that predates your doing the Camino, as I recall.
I think so.
It might even predate you doing podcasting, but I'm not sure how long ago that was.
It was some time ago for sure.
You mentioned you only have to worry about where you're going to sleep at night. Talk a little bit about that. How does that work on the Camino?
Well, the most common place to stay on the Camino is an albergue. So in many of the towns and sometimes just in little villages or in the cities, there are pilgrim hostels that are called albergues or refugios. So that means hostels or refuges. And they are usually only for pilgrims. If you want to use one, you have to get a pilgrim passport, which you can get before you start the Camino. It's just basically a folded piece of cardboard with spaces for stamps. You can order it online, or you can go to the cathedral of the town where you start, or the tourist office. And every night when you want to stay in an albergue, you present your pilgrim passport, and the person looking after the hostel will stamp it for you. The level or the standard of accommodation is different in every place. So sometimes it's really, really nice. Sometimes it's very basic. The albergues are either privately owned or run by the local council. So they're called municipal albergues, the ones that are run by the local council. And they tend to be a bit cheaper. We found it interesting in this most recent Camino because you can book the private albergues. And we didn't know that because in our previous Caminos, we'd always just shown up and booked in. And if an albergue was full, we'd go on to the next one. But this time we were in a group. There were 3 of us, and then the group expanded, and there were 5 of us, and then 7 of us. And so we couldn't just show up and expect to have 7 places free. So we started staying in the private albergues. And that meant we often got a private room. I mean, a private room for 7 people, but still, it was quite cool. So when you stay in these albergues, there's always showers, toilets, a place to wash your clothes. Sometimes there's a kitchen, sometimes there's a bar. Every place is different. There's usually bunk beds, and they provide you with disposable sheets, but you need to have your own sleeping bag.
You mentioned the cost being more or less when you're at the municipal ones. What kind of cost are we talking about?
It's not very much. The municipal ones usually cost between 5 or 6 euros, and a standard charge for a private albergue is around 10 euros a night.
So very cheap accommodation.
Very cheap, yeah.
And then you talked about when you don't have a reservation, when you're staying in the municipal ones, for instance, or when you just haven't made a reservation at the private ones, and they are full, then you hike on to the next one. How far is the next one? And at what time during the day do you need to decide that you're going to be stopping so that you aren't hiking all night to try and get to the next one?
That's a very good question. It depends on which Camino you're on. If you're on the Camino Frances, there are towns every 5 to 10 kilometers. So deciding when to stay is a very big factor. On our most recent Camino, on the Camino Primitivo, some people would show up, find out that there wasn't anywhere to sleep, there weren't any beds available, and they'll go and sleep in the forest, which I didn't really like the idea of. Most towns and villages also had private accommodation that we could choose, so it was never really a matter of hiking on to the next town. Usually it was just hiking on to the next hotel. But that's a factor that you need to consider. It's a good idea to have either a guidebook or at least a list of towns with information about what is in each town, how far the next town is, things like that, and to see if there is private accommodation in the town so that if you get stuck and there isn't a bed in the municipal albergue, you do have an option.
Okay. Tell me more about the experience. We want to go into more details about the hows, but let's go back to the whys. Tell me about the best day you had on this particular Camino.
One of my favorite days, I woke up, Craig was a bit unwell. He had problems with his blisters, so we left him behind. I was walking with my friend Janine, and we arrived in this little, not even a town, it was just a little bar in the middle of the forest. And we stopped to have a coffee, and some more of our friends arrived, and we had our coffee with them, and we decided that we wanted to walk alone because during most of this Camino we'd been walking together or in a group. And so she went off and I followed 5 minutes later. And it was just really nice to walk alone and think about why I was doing the Camino and where we were going to stay that night and the people I'd met. And I was walking quite fast, so I passed a lot of different people as I went up a hill. It was one of the difficult hills of the Camino. And, I just stopped to say hello or ask them how they were doing. And it was just really nice. Then I got to the top of the hill and I was thinking, I must be coming to the meeting point. I'd arranged to meet Janine at a certain bar. I was thinking, I must be almost there. I thought, I really, really want a sandwich, a bocadillo with ham and cheese. And I'd like a tinta de verano, which is a mix of red wine and lemonade. I was thinking, oh gosh, I'm really looking forward to getting to the bar and having those two things. I got to the bar and Janine had already ordered for them for me. It was just the best. So, and these little things, you just get so filled with joy because you don't have that much going on. So when you arrive and you've got your drink and you've got your sandwich, all is well with the world.
My impression is, and because I've heard you talk about the Camino multiple times, because I've listened to indie travel podcast as long as you guys have been doing it, which is 8 years now.
9 years.
Not counting the one you took off, but which I won't give you too much grief about. But my impression is that it's other than the end, and we'll save that and talk about that in a bit. Getting actually to the destination, assuming we're actually hiking for the destination, which I'm not convinced that that's really the point. It's
Not
a
really.
lot of moments rather than you go here and you see this. If I said, what's the most notable spot on the Camino, it's going to be more of a personal moment. Am I getting it correctly?
I'd say so. In fact, I find it difficult to remember all of the places I've been to. In fact, I was just reading over my notes of the Via de la Plata, and it was really great because I made a travel diary of every single day, and I could see what happened every day. And that reminded me of all these little moments. But looking back on it, I don't remember, I went to this town, and then I went to that town, and then I went to that town. It's more of the full experience of you get up in the morning, you walk. You talk to people and you walk. You stop for lunch and then you walk. And then you arrive and you collapse and you sleep. It's just a very simple routine. And I think you learn something about yourself while you're doing it. Maybe you learn that you don't like walking, or maybe you learn that you do. Or maybe you just, I don't know, you have to be with yourself because there's nothing else to do. And I think that's really freeing.
The other thing that's interesting that you've said is you mentioned the day that you wanted to walk by yourself, but you also said we started as 3 and then we were 5 and then we were 7.
Yes, that was quite funny. So we started off with me and Craig and our friend Janine. That was the 3 of us. And on day 1, so we arrived in an albergue, which was actually quite a lot closer to the beginning than most people would have chosen, because the information we had suggested that you do a 30-kilometre day on day 1, and there was no way we were going to do that. So we decided to break day 1 into two sections, a 12-kilometre day and an 18-kilometre day. So at the end of day 1, we arrived in this albergue, and there were only 3 or 4 pilgrims there. And we met a girl called Clotilde. So she became one of our friends. We saw her every day for the next 3 or 4 days. And eventually she just kind of formed part of the group. We were making sure that she had a bed, and we were just checking that she'd arrived okay, and she was just part of the group. On day 3, I think it was, we left our albergue. We'd actually missed out on the one that we really wanted to stay at, which was a private one, and we hadn't realized that we could book it. So it was from then on that we realized we could book the albergues. So we walked out of our place, and Janine actually collided with a guy who was walking at speed, and he'd come from the previous albergue. So we thought that was strange, and we kind of nicknamed him Speedy Gonzalez, and then we continued on. And about 45 minutes later, he stormed past us again. And we thought that was really strange, because how could he pass us when he'd already passed us? And so we said hello, and he said, I got lost. And it turned out that he had gotten lost every single day since he'd started. So we walked with him for that day, and we got on really well. And so after that, he kind of joined the group as well. So his name was Gabrielle, and so they were the first 2, Clotilde and Gabrielle. And when I started calling up albergues to book them, I decided to ask them if they wanted me to book for them as well. So because we were making these phone calls, we kind of had this group of 5 that we needed to book for. And then over the next few days, a woman called Nancy, an American, and also another Spanish guy called Pablo joined in. So that's how we ended up as 7. And when we arrived in Santiago, our arrival photo had 7 people in it because they were our group.
How much have you kept in touch with some of the people you met on the Camino in the past years?
Well, in this Camino, we've actually got a WhatsApp group. So I just received a message from Nancy on the WhatsApp group because it's Gabrielle's birthday. So, it's quite fun. We're definitely still in contact with that group. With previous Caminos, not so much with the Camino Inglés because it was only a very short one.
Right.
The Via de la Plata, there weren't as many people on it. We only met a few people, and they were older, so we didn't really get their details, so we're not on Facebook with them. But on the first Camino, Camino Frances, we're still in touch with 3 or 4 people, and it's really good to see what they're up to. We went and stayed with one of them, one of the people we met on the Camino Frances. He was house-sitting or looking after a castle in Belgium, so we went and stayed with him in his castle, so that was quite cool.
It's a dirty, thankless job, but somebody's got to do it.
Yeah.
You mentioned getting lost, and I have heard that sometimes the Camino is not as well marked as one might like.
That's true. We've definitely got lost. And after we joined forces with Gabriel, he led us astray. But
You let him navigate after all he had told you, Ori?
we were talking. We were in this town. We stopped to take some photos, and we just set off in the wrong direction. But luckily, we were walking down a hill, and someone pulled over in their car to say, "Are you on the Camino? Well, you're going the wrong way. Turn around." And so we turned around, and actually another pedestrian just joined with us to walk us to the place where we had to turn off. So that was really nice. On previous Caminos, on the Frances, we got lost a couple of times. But usually you can find your way again. And if you're willing to just stop and ask for help, then you'll be fine. And now, I mean, we have our smartphones with us, so we can always look at Google Maps and see if we're in the completely wrong place, if we're really worried.
Okay. And then blisters.
Blisters, yeah. It's a major factor.
You apparently left Craig somewhere in Spain on the route because he had blisters and it was man down. I assume he eventually caught up with you. But let's talk about some of the things that you should know before you go on the Camino. Blisters being probably the top of a lot of people's list. Yeah,
I think you need to know that you will almost certainly get blisters. On the first Camino, I actually didn't get any, maybe one small one, and everyone said I had miraculous feet. But on my other Caminos, I have certainly got blisters, and most people get them. It's something that you just got to expect. If you don't get blisters, you'll certainly have sore feet because you're walking for 20 to 30 kilometers a day. Mm-hmm. So it's a good idea to have some sort of blister solution pack. We use Compeed, which is a really, really great tool. They're like blister plasters that you stick on the blister or on a place where it's just starting to feel like you might get a blister. Mm-hmm. And you just leave them on. You leave them on until they fall off, even if you go into the shower, because they're actually quite expensive. But if you get the right ones, then they can stay on for several days. Okay. Lots of people have different techniques for dealing with blisters, such as, when we were on our first Camino, someone suggested to us that we cut open the blister and fill it with iodine, it's called betadine. And we found that to work quite well. But if you already have a technique for dealing with blisters, just continue with that.
And I assume the first obvious thing is don't bring a brand new pair of shoes that you haven't broken in.
Yeah.
Do you have any other suggestions?
I always wore 2 pairs of socks. So one really lightweight pair of socks, like business socks, and then a thicker wool pair. And that reduces friction, so you don't get as many blisters. However, on the most recent Camino, I did the same thing, and I ended up with really hot feet. So it doesn't work for everyone. Craig quite often wears walking sandals, so they're open shoes. And that way he doesn't get so many blisters, or he doesn't get so many, such a lot of problems with heat. But the reason he got blisters this time is because one of the shoes broke and he didn't fix it quickly enough. And so because the back part was broken, there was more rubbing. So he ended up with a big blister on the sole of his foot.
What other warning would you give before somebody does a Camino?
Whatever you do, pack the least amount possible, really, because you're carrying it. So one good rule of thumb is to carry less than 10% of your body weight. So if you weigh 60 kilos, you shouldn't be carrying more than about 6 or 7 kilos. So you need to find a lightweight backpack, a lightweight sleeping bag, and then put in the least amount of clothes you can. You really only need 2 changes of clothes. One set for wearing during the day and one set for wearing at night. I always carry extra pairs of socks because if you get wet socks, sometimes they don't dry very fast. So I always have kind of 4 pairs of socks and 4 pairs of undies. But apart from that, in terms of trousers and T-shirts, 2 is all you need. You also definitely need rain equipment. So you can either get a poncho and then a pack cover. But this time I had kind of a huge poncho that covered my head and then covered my bag as well. And that was a really good option because it was just one item. rather than having to put on the jacket and then the pack cover.
Okay. You arrive finally. Tell us about that.
It can be a bit disappointing when you finally arrive in Santiago because you're walking for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or as long as you're walking. And you have the idea that you're walking to Santiago. So then you arrive in Santiago and it's all over. And Santiago is a very nice city, but it's not that exciting. So it's got a very nice cathedral. At the moment, the cathedral is being reconstructed. So it can be a bit sad. Our first Camino, I was quite disappointed when I arrived. But the second Camino, I lowered my expectations and I was really excited to finally arrive. So it depends on where you set your expectations. If you think of it as a walk for walk's sake and not to get to Santiago, that might be a bit more helpful. So you arrive in Santiago, the first thing to do is go to the cathedral and get the obligatory photo in front of the cathedral. It's not very pretty at the moment because it's being reconstructed, but you've got to do it. After that, you need to go to the pilgrim office and get your Compostela, which is the certificate of completion. You have to hand over your pilgrim passport to show that you've actually been doing the Camino, and they'll give you a certificate. They expect you to make a donation, €1 or €2, something like that. Then you're done. After that, if you can, it's a really good idea to arrive in Santiago before 12 o'clock midday, because then you can go to the pilgrim mass. And you really have to, even if you're not Catholic, it's a good idea. It's just a nice completion thing. So we always go, and sometimes the Botafumeiro is swinging, which is an enormous incense burner. It's really enormous. It takes 8 men to swing it.
Oh, my.
And
okay.
yeah, the story goes that the reason they used to have the Botafumeiro is that the pilgrims arriving were so smelly that they swung this huge incense burner basically to hide the smell. Now, these days we have modern showers, so not quite as smelly, but it's just an amazing experience to see it swing. Unfortunately, it only swings if someone pays for it, and we've been lucky enough on 3 of our 4 Caminos to see it swing. So that's been really good. However, if you want to get a seat at the Mass, you have to arrive quite early, around 11:30 or 11:15, because so many people arrive every day, and most of them want to go to the Mass, that it's quite often packed to the rafters.
And you mentioned, even if you're not Catholic, and you're not Catholic, by the way,
Yep.
and last I checked, but and how many of the people that you would run into would be doing it for religious reasons? Do you know?
I wouldn't know. I haven't talked to very many who are doing it for purely religious reasons.
I was going to say, I would think it'd be a relatively small number.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
There used to be a question, well, there still is a question. When you arrive at the pilgrim office to get your certificate, you have to say whether you did the Camino for religious reasons, secular reasons, like non-spiritual reasons, or a mix of both. And I would say that probably 80 to 90% would be in that middle section.
Mix of both.
A mix of both, yeah. They've actually changed it. On our first Camino, if you said that you did it for non-religious reasons, you actually got a different certificate from the people who are doing it for spiritual reasons. But I'm pretty sure they just have the one certificate now.
Interesting. And you mentioned that the first time you were actually a little let down by finishing, and so you carried on.
Yeah.
You didn't end there. You had some extra days, in fact. And that seems like not an uncommon thing to then continue on to walk to the sea, because that's a pretty obvious stopping point at that place.
It's a great idea. I think it's a good idea to set the idea that you're going there right from the beginning, though, because the first day that we started walking from Santiago to Finisterre, I don't know, I'd had the idea that we were finishing in Santiago, and I was just so tired. So they say that it's a good idea to spend 2 or 3 days in Santiago so that you can meet the people that you've seen along the way. And I think we should have at least spent 2 nights there, because leaving after 1 night was definitely not the right decision. But going on to Finisterre is definitely a good idea.
What's the best advice that someone gave you about the Camino?
To do it. I think that's the best advice. Just do it, for sure. But also to pack light, like I said earlier. Take the least amount possible.
Were there any places along the route this time, or actually in any of your previous times, where you strayed from the route? There was some place that you were walking by that's not on the Camino, but it's worth stopping at.
There are lots of places, and they're usually marked on a map. If you have a guidebook that tells you what's along the way, you can do a little detour. So and they're quite often Roman ruins. On the most recent Camino, it was only about 500-meter to a 1-kilometer detour, just to go off the route a little bit, and we saw an old Roman bathhouse. So that was quite cool, just the remains of it. So yeah, there's definitely lots of options for that. On our first Camino, we took all of the detours, and on the most recent one, we didn't take as many because we were a bit more tired and old.
Yeah, I was thinking as you get closer to Santiago, do you take fewer detours, or as your feet get more weary?
I don't know. I think on our previous Camino, we probably took more because we didn't want it to end. So we were just trying to keep on going. But it depends on how you are. On the most recent one, we were both quite tired and Craig had his blister problems. So we definitely took the minimum amount of detours.
What was your biggest surprise this time?
I think my biggest surprise was being part of a big group. I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting to do the Camino with Craig and Janine, and that would be it. We'd meet people, but we'd leave them behind. But that wasn't what happened at all. We really got to know these people, and they became really good friends, and we ended up being a group. So that was quite interesting. I think one thing people don't realize about the Camino is that it's really social. So you get to know people along the way. It's not just about walking.
And what is the appropriate greeting when you run into somebody on the Camino?
When you run into someone, you can just say hi. But the most important thing, when you leave, you can say buen camino, which means have a good walk or good walk. So it's more about how you say goodbye than how you say hello.
Okay. One picture that brings back this experience, this particular Camino.
I think for me, the Camino is always the road stretching out in front of you. And it could be like a proper road, or it could be just a footpath. It could be winding up the hill. But that's always the way I see the Camino, the road stretching out in front.
Before we get to our last 3 questions, what else should we know before we... And one more time, the name of this Camino that you did.
So the Camino I did was the Camino Primitivo.
Primitivo.
And we've actually got lots of notes about the different Caminos at indietravelpodcast.com/Camino.
As well as at least 4 episodes about the different Caminos.
That's right. So there are links to all of those different episodes at the Camino page. So it's a good stopping point.
What else should we know before we follow in your literal footsteps?
One thing you should know is that it's a really good idea to have some sort of guidebook with you. The way is marked with yellow arrows. And although we talked about getting lost earlier, you probably won't get lost, or you won't get very lost. And you can just follow the arrows and you'll get to where you need to go. But what you do need to know is how far away the towns are, what the distance is, and things like that. So a good guidebook is a good option. You could get one just for your phone. I like to have a 1-page printout of a list of towns with the distances between them and the facilities in each town, so that I can plan where I'm going to stop along the way. And the benefit of that is that you can just put it in your pocket. On this most recent Camino, we didn't use any guidebook at all. We just used the Eroski guide. Now, Eroski is a supermarket in Spain, and for some reason, they have a website full of helpful tips of various kinds. And they have a whole section about the Camino de Santiago. So if you speak Spanish, you can go to caminodesantiago.consumer.es. Even if you don't speak Spanish, you can have a look at the guides and look at the photos and look at, they've got like topography of each section, so you can see whether you're going to be going straight up, straight down, or a mix of both. And yes, it also has information about the towns along the way. So I found that quite useful. I had the Primitivo guide just saved on my phone, so I could have a look at that every night. So yeah, definitely get either a guidebook or an app and have some information so that you can read along the way. I quite liked looking up the historical information or information about the towns that I was in, either the night before or the night that I was there. So it was quite good reading material.
Excellent. And I should mention that this is actually the second episode we have done on the Camino. The other one, though, we cheated, and we have an episode on mountain biking the Camino, which I'm sure, purists will be aghast at. But
no, I think it's a really good way to do it. You can also go by horse, and I'd never met anyone who's done it by horse until this Camino, and he was actually going back the other way. So I thought that was quite interesting. His problem was he was doing it with a horse and 2 dogs, and one of the dogs had actually been stepped on by the horse, and so they'd had to stop for several weeks while the dog recovered. I think it's a good idea to do it by horse with dogs. No, doing it by bike is definitely a good option as well.
Excellent. Last 3 questions. One thing that makes you laugh and say only on the Camino.
Only on the Camino will you be sitting around at breakfast, fixing your feet. and it's totally normal. Yeah.
And you
Every
really
morning at their blisters, and it's quite disgusting.
That may be the answer to the other question is you really know you're hiking the Camino when what?
Yeah, I was going to say that, but I think you really know you're walking the Camino when you arrive in a town after walking 20 kilometers and you decide just to go another 10 kilometers because you're really just not done with walking for the day.
Excellent. And if you had to describe the experience in just 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
I would say freedom, community, and challenge.
Excellent. Linda, where can people hear more about your travels?
Just go to indietravelpodcast.com and you can listen to our podcast and read our articles and everything.
And the URL for your Camino page?
That's indietravelpodcast.com/Camino. Nice and easy.
Excellent. And I think the most recent episode of the Indie Travel is on your Camino experience?
One of the most recent. The most recent one is actually about Berlin.
Oh, right. That's true. Okay.
Missed that one.
No, I've heard it, but I just forgot that you had done that one. Excellent. Thanks so much for coming back on The Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love, your obvious love for the Camino de Santiago.
Thanks for having me.
In news of the community, there's a decision made in terms of an amateur traveler trip for next year, for 2016, probably around April, and that is Cambodia and Angkor Wat. Currently looking at a trip that starts in Saigon, then goes to Cambodia and ends in Bangkok, Thailand. So anybody who wants to see Vietnam or Thailand, it can also fit well with the 10-day trip that we're looking at. For details on that, go to amateurtraveler.com/trip. and join the private Facebook community where we're talking about all the details for that. I heard this week from Sandy about the episode we did last week on Santa Barbara. She said, as a native, I was surprised to learn some things as well. I thought I would add a few things. Fiesta was mentioned, but there are many festivals in the area, notably summer solstice, ethnic festivals, and beer festivals. Speaking of beer, there are 2 breweries in Buellton, Firestone and the newer, hipper Figueroa Mountain. Fig, as it is known to locals, is in an industrial area that is growing with wineries and restaurants. While Fig doesn't have a restaurant yet, there are often food booths, and you can also order food delivered from the excellent Geno's. Industrial Eats is a restaurant that has shared tables, eclectic food. You can bring your own wine, lots of local wine tasting, and no corkage fee. Love your podcast. Keep up the good work. Sandy. Thanks so much, Sandy. I always appreciate it when people do what Sandy did and left this as a comment on the episode so that other people could see it. With that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com. Or better yet, do what Sandy did and leave your question on the episode at amateurtraveler.com. You can also follow me on Twitter, Pinterest, or Instagram as Chris2X, and maybe even Periscope. As I edited this show, I did some of it as a Periscope. And as always, thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one